My name is Eleanor Vance, I'm 61 years old. And in front of a lobby full of wealthy strangers, my daughter-in-law told everyone that I deserved to sleep in the garbage. Before I tell you how I ended up with the keys to the penthouse suite, and she ended up facing a bitter divorce, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I'd love to see how far my story has traveled. It started, as these things often do, with the illusion of family. I always believed that family was everything. A safe harbor. Place you belonged. But that afternoon, standing in the grand wood-paneled lobby of the Aspen Pines Lodge in Colorado, I learned just how wrong I was. My daughter-in-law, Jessica, stood before me, a triumphant smirk playing on her perfectly glossed lips. She placed a hand on her hip, her designer ski jacket rustling, and raised her voice just enough for the entire lobby to hear. "We've canceled your room, Eleanor," she announced, the words echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. My son, my only child, Ethan, stood a few feet behind her. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at his expensive boots, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his own jacket. He was a silent, willing accomplice to my humiliation. The air crackled. The soft murmur of conversations died down. I could feel dozens of eyes turning toward us. Jessica savored the attention. She let the silence hang for a moment before delivering the final blow. "We just felt it was a waste of money," she continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You deserve to sleep in the garbage shed, after everything." A few chuckles broke the silence. Not loud laughter, but cruel, muffled snickers from elegantly dressed guests waiting to check in. A hot flush crawled up my neck, burning my cheeks. It felt like a punch to the gut. The world seemed to tilt, the magnificent stone fireplace and the glittering crystal chandeliers blurring before my eyes. Humiliation. Betrayal. A pain so sharp and sudden it literally took my breath away. And in that moment of blinding shame, another memory surfaced, sharp and ugly. Just that morning in our cramped hotel room on the drive up, I'd been getting ready, laying out the one nice wool dress I owned for our first dinner at the lodge. Jessica had breezed past me, a full mug of black coffee in her hand. She tripped, sending the dark, steaming liquid splashing all over the front of my dress. "Oh my gosh, Eleanor, I am so sorry," she had gasped, her eyes wide with fake horror. But I had seen it. For a split second, I saw a glint of pure, unadulterated triumph in her eyes before she masked it. At the time I brushed it off. An accident. Now, standing in the lobby in my worn, comfortable sweater, the only other decent thing I had, I understood. It wasn't an accident. It was a calculated move. Part of a larger plan to make me feel small, out of place, and worthless. She wanted me to look like a poor relation, an unwanted burden. And my son had let it happen. For a heartbeat, all I wanted to do was turn and run. Flee the lodge, flee the judging eyes, flee the family that so clearly despised me. I could call a cab, go to the bus station, and just disappear from their lives forever. But then, as the last of the snickers died down, something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a strange, cold clarity. A lifetime of biting my tongue, of accepting passive-aggressive insults, of being conveniently forgotten on holidays. It all coalesced into a single hard point of resolve in the center of my chest. I had tolerated enough. I was done being their doormat. I took a slow, deliberate breath. The trembling in my hands stopped. I straightened my spine, lifting my chin just a little. I could feel Ethan's panicked gaze on me now, Jessica's smug one. They expected me to cry, to beg, to make a scene that would validate their narrative of me being a difficult, emotional old woman. I did none of those things. Instead, I adjusted the strap of my worn leather purse on my shoulder. Every eye in that lobby was on me, watching, waiting for me to break. But they didn't know the secret I carried. They didn't know that I wasn't there to plead for a room. With my back ramrod straight, I started walking. Not toward the exit. Not toward my son. I walked right past them, my sensible shoes making no sound on the plush Persian rugs, heading directly for the polished marble of the front desk. The young woman behind the counter looked at me with pity in her eyes, already preparing a gentle rejection. She thought she knew how this story ended. She had no idea. I reached into my purse, my fingers closing around the one thing my late husband, Robert, had told me to use only in the direst of emergencies. This was it. This was the moment. I placed my simple, worn purse on the cold marble countertop. The young woman behind it, whose name tag read Chloe, offered me a small, pitying smile. It was the kind of smile you give a confused old woman who has wandered into the wrong place. A look that said, "Oh, you poor dear, you're clearly lost." "Can I help you, ma'am?" she asked, her voice soft and patronizing, meant to soothe the confused elderly person she assumed I was. I didn't answer her. Words felt useless, hollow. They were the weapons my son and his wife had used to cut me down, and I had no intention of using them to plead my case. Instead, I reached into my purse, my fingers bypassing my wallet, my reading glasses, the tube of lipstick I hadn't touched all day. My hand closed around the cool, heavy metal. I pulled it out. It wasn't a credit card, and it certainly wasn't a hotel rewards card. It was a solid piece of black, brushed metal, heavier than it looked, with a simple, elegant engraving on the front in silver script. The Aspen Pines Lodge Founder's Legacy card. I placed it on the counter with a quiet, definitive click. The sound, though small, seemed to cut through the sudden hush of the lobby like a gunshot. Chloe picked it up, her professionally cheerful expression faltering. Her eyes widened as she read the engraving, her perfectly manicured fingers tracing the letters as if she couldn't believe what they were seeing. She looked from the card to my simple, coffee-stained sweater, then back to the card, a flicker of frantic disbelief in her eyes. Her hand trembled slightly as she swiped it through the reader next to her terminal. The machine beeped softly, a single authoritative tone, and a new screen instantly filled her monitor. "Mrs. Vance," she whispered, the name a question, a gasp. Her face had gone completely pale, as if she'd seen a ghost. All the color drained from her cheeks, leaving two bright spots of blush standing out starkly. We didn't know you were coming. I am so sorry. Your name on the ownership registry is listed as E.R. Vance. We had no idea." Her voice was a frantic, terrified whisper. Behind me, the silence was now absolute, thick and heavy. The whispers had stopped. The snickers had died in people's throats. I could feel the weight of every stare in that room boring into my back, no longer filled with pity or amusement, but with stunned confusion. I heard a choked gasp. It sounded like Jessica. "Ownership," someone else muttered, the word rippling through the crowd. Just then, a man in a perfectly tailored three-piece suit burst out of a side office marked management, his face a mask of professional concern. He was tall, with distinguished graying hair at his temples and an air of authority. This was Mr. Harrison, the general manager. He strode toward the desk, his eyes initially on Chloe, his expression annoyed. "What's the holdup here? We have guests waiting," he began, his voice crisp. Then his eyes fell on me, and then on the black card still sitting on the counter. He stopped dead in his tracks. His jaw literally dropped for a second before he snapped it shut, a purely comical expression of disbelief on his usually stoic face. "Mrs. Vance," he exclaimed, his voice booming with a mixture of shock and utter reverence that filled the entire lobby. He hurried around the desk, his composure completely shattered. He looked as if the president had just walked in unannounced. "What an honor! A profound honor. We had absolutely no idea you would be gracing us with your presence. The presidential penthouse is always prepared for you, of course. Everything has been arranged to your late husband's specifications. Please forgive this oversight. It is inexcusable." He was practically bowing, his face flushed with embarrassment. Slowly, deliberately, I turned around to face my family. Ethan looked like he had been struck by lightning. His mouth was hanging open, his face as white as the snow blanketing the mountains outside. He looked from me to the fawning Mr. Harrison and back again, his mind clearly struggling to process this impossible reality. Jessica was frozen solid. Her smug, cruel mask had shattered into a million pieces, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. But beneath the shock I saw something else, something I had never seen in her before. Raw, primal fear. Her perfectly constructed world, where she was the queen and I was the court jester, was crumbling around her, and she knew it. The children, sensing the sudden, violent shift in tension, clung to their father's legs, their eyes wide with confusion. The people who had been snickering moments before were now staring at their shoes, at the ceiling, anywhere but at me or my family. The air was thick with their shared embarrassment. Mr. Harrison, oblivious or perhaps deliberately ignoring the family drama unfolding before him, gestured to a young bellhop who had appeared as if from nowhere. Please escort Mrs. Vance to the presidential penthouse immediately, he commanded. He then turned back to me, his voice smooth as silk. We have a vintage Dom Perignon chilling, and our executive chef is at your disposal for whatever you may desire for dinner. Anything at all. I gave a single silent nod. I still didn't trust my voice to speak. Perfect, he beamed. He then glanced over at Ethan and Jessica, and his expression became coolly professional, a mask of polite disdain settling over his features. He had seen the whole thing. He knew exactly what had happened here. And your companions? He asked, the word hanging in the air like an insult. The words were my cue. Finally I found my voice. It came out stronger and clearer than I could have hoped. They have their own reservation, I said, my words clear and precise in the silent room. They will not be staying with me. Mr. Harrison didn't miss a beat. Of course, madam. He gave them a look that was utterly dismissive, as if they were something unpleasant he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. He turned to the bellhop. Take Mrs. Vance's luggage. As the young man stepped forward to take my small single suitcase, Ethan finally moved, a puppet whose strings had just been yanked. Mom, he croaked, taking a clumsy step toward me. Mom, wait. We need to talk. I looked at him. I really looked at him. And for the first time, as the doors to a private, gilded elevator slid open with a soft chime just for me, I saw not my son, but the stranger he had become. And in that moment I felt absolutely nothing. The presidential penthouse was breathtaking. A world of quiet luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the snow-covered Rocky Mountains, their peaks glowing in the late afternoon sun. A baby grand piano sat in one corner. A fire roared in a massive stone fireplace, and a bottle of vintage champagne was indeed chilling in a silver bucket on a marble-top table. It was a palace in the sky, a universe away from the small, modest home I'd shared with my husband, Robert, for 40 years. But I barely saw any of it. My body felt heavy, drained. I walked over to the plush velvet sofa and sank into it, the profound silence of the room a deafening roar in my ears. Finally, I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 15 years. A shaky, ragged sound that was half sob, half sigh of relief. 15 years. That was how long ago Robert had passed away. He was a quiet man. A brilliant investor who preferred tinkering in his basement workshop to attending fancy parties. We lived simply, never flaunting the wealth he was quietly, expertly accumulating in the background of our lives. When he died from a sudden massive heart attack, he left me with a portfolio that stunned even our longtime estate lawyer. Stocks, bonds, commercial real estate, and a 30% founding stake in a new ambitious luxury resort project called the Aspen Pines Lodge. It was his passion project, the one big gamble he'd taken. He believed in it. He saw its potential to become a legacy. I was reeling from the grief, lost in a fog of disbelief, but I knew I had to be strong. Ethan was just out of college, full of big ideas and the unearned confidence of a young man who had never faced a real hardship. He and Jessica, who he'd only been dating for 6 months but was already inseparable from, sat me down at my old oak kitchen table, a mountain of intimidating financial paperwork between us. Mom, this is a lot, Ethan had said, trying to sound mature and in charge, his brow furrowed with performative concern. I think you should let me handle the finances from here. I don't want you to get stressed out or make any mistakes. Mistakes. The word hung in the air, thick and condescending. As if 40 years of managing a household, a budget, and a life meant nothing. As if my grief had suddenly rendered me a feeble-minded child. Jessica, ever the supportive girlfriend, placed a delicate hand on his arm. He's just trying to protect you, Eleanor, she'd cooed, her voice dripping with false sympathy. It's so much to deal with after everything. Maybe it would be best if Ethan took over the accounts, managed the inheritance. You could just relax, live off the pension. You've earned a rest. The pension. They spoke of it as if it were a few $100s a month, just enough to keep the lights on. They had no idea. They saw a grieving widow and assumed she was a helpless one. Something in their condescending tone, in the way they looked at me with a mixture of pity and impatience, made a decision for me in that moment. A cold, hard resolve formed in my heart. I wanted to see who they really were, stripped of any expectation of financial gain. I wanted to know if my son loved me, his mother, or if he and this calculating young woman simply saw me as an obligation, a problem to be managed before they could get on with their lives. So I played my part. I let them believe they were in control. I sighed and looked overwhelmed. I showed them a few of the smaller, simpler accounts, the basic pension statements from Robert's old job. It was enough to satisfy their curiosity, enough to make them believe they knew the whole picture. I let them think I was a simple widow with a modest, fixed income, destined to live out my days pinching pennies. The rest of it, the real estate holdings, the multi-million-dollar stock portfolio, the funeral expenses that were already covered, and my founding partnership in this very lodge, I kept it all to myself. It was my secret, my test. And for 15 years they failed that test. Spectacularly. The weekly visits to help me with paperwork dwindled to monthly check-ins, then to holiday-only appearances once they were sure the easy money was settled. After they got married in a ceremony I was barely consulted on, I was invited to Christmas dinner, but always with a caveat. We'd love to have you, Mom, but the car is just so full with the kids and the presents, I'm not sure we'll have room. I later found out from a talkative cousin that they'd rented a 7-passenger Lincoln Navigator. There were only 5 of them. They just didn't want me there. When my grandchildren Mason and Sophie were born, I offered to help in any way I could. I yearned to be the doting grandmother. But Jessica always had an excuse. Oh, the kids are on a very strict schedule, Eleanor. It would be too disruptive to have visitors. The invitations to their birthday parties would mysteriously arrive in the mail a day after the event had passed. Oh, the post office is so unreliable these days, she'd say with a dismissive shrug, never meeting my eye. The worst was last year. I came down with a terrible case of bronchitis. It was the sickest I'd been in years, and the loneliness was a physical weight on my chest. I was scared. I called Ethan, not asking for anything, just wanting to hear his voice. He was short with me. I'm in the middle of a huge project at work, Mom. Can I call you back? He never did. 2 weeks later, my neighbor, a kind woman named Carol, showed me Jessica's Facebook page on her iPad. There they were, my son, my daughter-in-law, my grandchildren, all tanned and smiling on a pristine beach in Hawaii. The caption read, "Surprise family getaway." So needed this. He hadn't been at work. He'd been on vacation. And he couldn't spare 60 seconds to call his sick mother back. A sharp, insistent ringing jolted me back to the present. It was the phone on the ornate table beside me. I stared at it. It rang again and again. I knew who it was. I let it ring until it stopped. A moment later, my cell phone, which I'd placed on the table, began to vibrate, buzzing angrily against the polished wood. The screen lit up, Ethan. I silenced it. Another call immediately followed. And another. Then a text message appeared. A desperate little flag of surrender. Mom, please. We need to talk. We're in the restaurant downstairs. We'll wait for you. I looked at the message for a long time, the words blurring. Then, with fingers that were surprisingly steady, I typed a reply. I will see you in the restaurant at 7 p.m. You and Jessica. Alone. The children can stay with the hotel's nanny service. The curtain was about to rise on the final act, and this time I was the one directing the show. I walked into the Summit, the lodge's finest restaurant, at exactly 7 o'clock. The maitre d', the same man who had fawned over me in the lobby, rushed to greet me, his face alight with recognition. Mrs. Vance, a pleasure to see you again. Your guests are waiting. He led me to a secluded corner table, a quiet alcove with a view of the darkening mountains. Ethan and Jessica sat there in stiff, uncomfortable silence. Ethan jumped to his feet as I approached, knocking his water glass slightly. Jessica remained seated, her posture as rigid as a statue, her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists on the table. She was trying to project an aura of control, but the panic in her eyes betrayed her. I sat down opposite them without a word. A waiter appeared instantly, as if summoned by magic, filling my water glass and offering me a menu bound in soft leather. I didn't even look at it. I'll have the pan-seared salmon, I said, my eyes fixed on my son. And a glass of the estate Chardonnay. The waiter scurried away, and the silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, Ethan broke it, his voice strained and cracking. Mom, why did you never tell us? I took a slow sip of my water, savoring the cool liquid before answering. Tell you what exactly, Ethan? That I have money. That your father was a brilliant man who ensured I would be taken care of for the rest of my life? Is that information you needed to treat me with basic human decency? Is love something that has a price tag for you? He flinched as if I'd slapped him. No, it's not like that. Isn't it? I countered, my voice dangerously quiet. Jessica, unable to stay silent any longer, leaned forward, her eyes blazing with a cold fire. You made us look like absolute fools out there this afternoon. In front of all those people. I met her gaze without blinking. For the first time in 15 years, I didn't look away from her glare. I held it. No, Jessica, I said, my voice soft but laced with steel. I didn't do anything. I walked to a counter and presented a card. You stood in the middle of a crowded lobby and announced to the world that you were throwing your husband's mother out to sleep in the garbage. You showed everyone in that lobby exactly who you are. All on your own. She recoiled, her mouth falling open, a flush creeping up her neck. The waiter returned with my wine, placing it gently on the table before retreating as quickly as possible. We thought you were barely getting by on Dad's pension, Ethan stammered, trying to regain some footing. I never said that, I replied calmly. You assumed that. Because it was easier for you to assume I was poor and needy. It fit the narrative you wanted. The one where you were the dutiful son caring for his helpless mother. It made you feel noble, didn't it? Of course we love you, Mom. We've always loved you, he insisted, but the words sounded hollow, rehearsed. Really? I said, raising an eyebrow. My memory, honed by years of lonely nights and quiet observation, was suddenly crystal clear. Let's talk about that love, shall we? Let's talk about my 60th birthday last year. A milestone. Not a card. Not a phone call. Not a single text message. But 2 weeks earlier, you threw Jessica a surprise party that, from what her cousin Linda told me at the grocery store, cost over $5,000. Complete with a live band and an ice sculpture. Was my love not worth the price of a postage stamp? I called you after, Ethan protested weakly. I apologized. 3 days after, I corrected him without emotion. After I called you first. And your excuse was that you were swamped at work. You were in Hawaii, Ethan. I saw the pictures on Facebook. You were posing with a surfboard. The color drained from his face. Jessica shot him a furious, venomous look. This was news to her. And you, Jessica, I said, turning my full attention to her. Let's talk about the silver locket. My mother's locket. The one I gave you for your 5th wedding anniversary. An heirloom. Do you remember what you said? I didn't wait for an answer. You said it was the most thoughtful gift you'd ever received. 6 months later, I saw it in the display case of a high-end consignment shop downtown. The owner is a friend of mine. She told me a pretty blonde woman had sold it to her, complaining it was too old-fashioned. Jessica's face was a mask of horror. She was trapped. This is ridiculous, she hissed, her voice trembling. You're acting like a vindictive child, keeping a scorecard of every little slight. A little slight? I repeated, my voice dropping even lower. My salmon had arrived, perfectly cooked, but I had no appetite. I picked up my fork and knife. Let's talk about your request for Mason's college fund last spring. You called me Ethan, sounding so worried. You said you were strapped for cash and asked if I could contribute. You made me feel guilty for only being able to offer a few $100s from my pension. 2 days later, Jessica posted photos of the new designer patio furniture she just bought. And the week after that, you both flew to Napa for a long weekend. Forgive me if I call that more than a little slight. It's called fraud. I put my fork down. For 15 years, you treated me like a piece of inconvenient furniture. Something to be dusted off when you needed a babysitter and shoved back in the corner when you were done. The difference is, this afternoon the furniture spoke back. I looked at my son, his face a mess of shame and disbelief. I looked at his wife, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. They had nothing to say. There were no more lies to hide behind. The truth, stark and ugly, was sitting at the table with us. I placed my napkin on the table. I'm finished here. I stood up, my chair making a soft scraping sound on the floor. You wanted me to have my own room. Now you have your wish. Enjoy your dinner. I walked away, not looking back, feeling the weight of their stares, and the curious eyes of every other diner in the restaurant follow me out the door. I found a quiet, sun-drenched cafe the next morning, tucked away from the main lodge on a side street in town. I needed the anonymity, the simple, grounding comfort of a hot cup of coffee, a flaky croissant, and the morning paper. The peace lasted for about 15 glorious minutes. Then the bell above the door jingled, and a shadow fell over my table. It was Ethan. He looked like he had been through a war. His eyes were red-rimmed and deeply swollen. His normally immaculate hair was a rumpled mess, and he hadn't shaved. He wore the same expensive clothes from the night before, now hopelessly wrinkled as if he'd slept in them. He slid into the booth opposite me without asking, the movement clumsy and exhausted. "I didn't sleep last night," he said, his voice a hoarse, raw whisper. He didn't look at me, just stared into the dark, swirling surface of my coffee as if looking for answers. I just kept remembering. "And you're right, Mom. About everything. Every single word. You were right about all of it." I continued to butter my croissant, my movements slow and deliberate. I refused to give him the emotional reaction he was so clearly craving. I wouldn't cry with him or rush to absolve him of his 15 years of sins. That was his burden to carry now, not mine. I had carried it long enough. "Jessica and I, we had a huge fight," he continued, the words tumbling out in a rush of misery. He ran a trembling hand through his messy hair. "A terrible one. She says you're exaggerating, that you're being manipulative, that this is all some twisted game to you. But he trailed off, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I started remembering things. Specific things. Things I had pushed aside for years, details I had deliberately ignored because it was just easier. So much easier than confronting her. So much easier than confronting myself. I took a slow sip of my coffee, the hot liquid a small, steadying comfort. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken history. He was waiting for me to say something, to offer a crumb of comfort, to make it better like I always had when he was a boy. I offered him nothing but silence. "I've been a bad son," he finally choked out, his voice cracking with the weight of the admission. He finally looked up, and his eyes were swimming with unshed tears. "The worst kind of son." I put down my newspaper and met his gaze for the first time. "Yes," I said simply. My voice was even devoid of anger or pity. It was a statement of indisputable fact, as simple as saying the sky was blue. "You have been." He looked stunned by my blunt, unvarnished agreement. I think he expected me to argue, to say, No, you're not, honey. You were just confused." But I was done with the lies, done with placating his weakness. The truth was all I had left. "But Ethan," I continued, placing my cup down gently in its saucer, "I didn't come on this trip for an apology. I didn't come here for you to finally have this grand dramatic realization. I came here because Jessica extended an invitation, and like an absolute fool, I held onto a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different this time. That was my mistake." "They can be," he said quickly, leaning forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. His eyes were wild with desperation. "We can change. I can change. I'll talk to Jessica, I'll set boundaries, we'll make it up to you, I swear. We can start over." I held up a hand to stop the torrent of empty promises. A single pointed question had been forming in my mind all morning. A cold, hard diamond of a question. "Why?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "Why the sudden, passionate change of heart, Ethan?" "What do you mean?" he asked, looking confused. "I mean, why now? Why, after 15 years of casual neglect and deliberate cruelty, are you suddenly so desperate to fix things? Is it because you finally see me as your mother?" I paused, letting the question hang in the air between us like a charged particle. "Or is it because you just found out your mother has a significant net worth? Is this about love? Or is it about you realizing you might lose a multi-million-dollar inheritance? Is this about my heart? Or my wallet?" He flinched, the truth of the question hitting him like a physical blow. His face crumpled. "No," he protested, but there was no conviction in his voice. His eyes darted away, unable to meet mine. It's not just that. You're my mother." "I was your mother yesterday, Ethan," I said, my voice hardening, each word a carefully placed stone. I was your mother last year when I was sick with bronchitis and you were sunning yourself on a beach in Hawaii. I was your mother every single Christmas you allowed your wife to tell me there was no room in the car. That fundamental fact has not changed. What changed in that lobby yesterday was your perception of my financial portfolio. He couldn't deny it. He just sat there, the picture of a man whose carefully constructed world had been built on a foundation of greed and willful ignorance. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing he could say. I had seen the ugly, grasping truth in his eyes. He finally looked up, his face a mess of shame and desperation. "Mom, what can I do?" he whispered. "Tell me what to do." "There's nothing you can do to fix this, Ethan," I said. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't the whole story. He looked down at his hands on the table, his shoulders shaking. "There's something else," he mumbled, his voice so low I had to lean in to hear him. "Something you don't know. Right after Dad's funeral, Jessica told me to do something I'm so ashamed of. Later that afternoon, I decided to use the spa I was rightfully entitled to. I deserved it. After 15 years of being made to feel worthless, a little pampering seemed not just like a luxury but a necessity. I was in the quiet room, a tranquil space with heated loungers and infused water, wrapped in a plush white robe trying to soak up the peace. I was just starting to relax when one of the attendants approached me, her expression a mixture of nervousness and apology. "Excuse me, Mrs. Vance," she whispered, her voice barely disturbing the quiet. "I'm so sorry to interrupt. There's a woman at the front desk. She's very insistent on seeing you. She says she's your daughter-in-law." I closed my eyes and let out a long, weary sigh. The fleeting sense of peace evaporated like mist. "Please inform her that I am unavailable for the remainder of the day." The attendant nodded and scurried away. I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Jessica was like a dog with a bone. 5 minutes later, my cell phone, tucked into the deep pocket of my robe, began to vibrate insistently. The screen lit up, "Jessica." I ignored it. It rang again immediately, a frantic, demanding summons. I silenced the call and turned the phone off completely. But she was resourceful. A moment later, the spa's internal phone on the wall chirped softly. The same poor attendant answered it, her face paling as she listened to the voice on the other end. She walked over to me, her expression deeply apologetic. "Mrs. Vance, I am so sorry," she says. "She says if you don't come down to the lobby right now, she will cause a scene that will require security to be called." The audacity, the sheer, unmitigated gall of the woman was almost impressive. She was threatening to throw a tantrum in the 5-star resort I co-owned. I thought about calling her bluff, about letting her scream and shout and make an absolute fool of herself. It was tempting, but I was tired, so incredibly tired of the drama. "Tell her I will meet her in the main sitting area in 5 minutes, I said, my voice cold and flat. I dressed slowly, deliberately, not bothering with makeup. I wasn't performing for her anymore. I found her pacing back and forth on one of the expensive oriental rugs near the grand fireplace, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She wasn't wearing her usual mask of perfect composure and condescending smiles. Her eyes were red and puffy, her designer clothes looked rumpled, and her immaculate hair was slightly disheveled. For the first time she looked genuinely undone. She stopped pacing the second she saw me. "You are ruining my marriage," she said, the words flying out of her mouth without any preamble, sharp and accusatory. I calmly sat down in one of the high-backed velvet armchairs. "I am doing no such thing, Jessica. Your choices are ruining your marriage. Your years of cruelty and deceit are ruining your marriage. I am merely a mirror reflecting them back at you. Don't blame the mirror for the face you see in it." "Ethan was up all night," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and raw fear. "He was looking at old photos, reading old text messages. He's remembering. He's putting it all together. He's calling me a liar. A manipulator." She started to cry then, ugly blotchy tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. "He looks at me like I'm a monster. He said I turned him into a person he doesn't even recognize. A man who would let his own mother be humiliated." The confession was raw, desperate, and utterly self-serving. For a split second, I almost felt a flicker of pity for her. Almost. "He said I'm just like my mother," she sobbed. And then the whole pathetic story came tumbling out. She told me about her own mother, a controlling, narcissistic woman who had interfered in her first marriage until it fell apart. When I married Ethan, I swore I would never let that happen. I swore I would protect my family from a meddling mother-in-law. I was so scared of you becoming her. Except I never meddled, Jessica, I said quietly, my voice devoid of sympathy. I never once offered an unsolicited opinion on your marriage, your parenting, your choice of home, your career, or your life. I respected your boundaries so much that I practically ceased to exist for you. I know, she cried, the sound sharp and grating. But I couldn't see it. I was so blinded by my own past. Every time you tried to get close, every time you called or offered to help, all I saw was my mother. I saw an invasion. So I pushed you away. And Ethan let me because he trusted me. I made him believe I was doing it for us, for the good of our family. It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me, but it was 15 years too late. So what do you want from me now? I asked, my voice flat. An apology? Absolution? Do you want me to go to my son and tell him it was all a big misunderstanding so he'll stop looking at you like the monster you've revealed yourself to be? Yes, she said, lunging forward and grabbing my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her nails digging into my skin. Please, just give me another chance. I can be better. I'll be the daughter-in-law you always wanted. We can go shopping, we can have lunch, the kids can come for sleepovers. I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back up at her tear-streaked, desperate face. A chance for what, Jessica? I asked, pulling my arm away with a sharp tug. A chance to have awkward dinners where we all pretend the last 15 years didn't happen? A chance to be a part of my grandchildren's lives now that you know there's a substantial inheritance at stake? A chance to get your hands on my money through my son? No, I don't think so. Her face hardened instantly. The tears stopped as if a faucet had been turned off. The desperate wife vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating woman I knew so well. You can't do this, she hissed. Ethan mentioned getting a lawyer. Is that what this is about? You're trying to cut him out of the will, out of the inheritance. The children need their grandmother, she added, a clear threat in her voice. The children don't even know their grandmother, I replied, my voice like ice. And that, Jessica, is entirely and solely on you. I didn't go back to the spa. The tranquility I'd sought was gone, replaced by the ugly residue of Jessica's desperation. Instead, I went up to the penthouse, the silence of the magnificent rooms a welcome balm. I walked over to the phone, my steps resolute, and called my estate lawyer in Charleston. David, I said, my voice steady and clear when he answered. It's Eleanor Vance. I need you to start the process of divesting my shares in the Aspen Pines Lodge. All of them. Immediately. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. David had been Robert's lawyer and now mine for over 20 years. He was a calm, unflappable man, but my request clearly shocked him. Eleanor, are you sure? That investment has been incredibly profitable. Your quarterly dividends alone are substantial. I'm sure, David, I said. I want no more connection to this place. I also need you to draft the paperwork to establish a new, irrevocable trust fund. I spent the next hour on the phone, my voice calm and precise, laying out my final plans. I was cutting the financial cords that still bound me to my old life, to the son who had disappointed me so profoundly. I dictated the terms. The trust would be for my grandchildren, Mason and Sophie, to be split equally. They would gain access to the funds on their 25th birthdays, not a day before. Until then, the principal was untouchable. And I added, making sure David understood the gravity of the clause, neither Ethan nor Jessica were to be named as trustees or have any legal access or control over the funds under any circumstances. When I finally hung up the phone, I felt a profound sense of lightness, of finality. I had made my decision. I was leaving the next morning. My new life was waiting. I was in the grand lobby, settling my account, a mere formality as Mr. Harrison insisted everything was complimentary for the owner, when Ethan appeared one last time. He stood in the main entryway, a desolate figure silhouetted against the bright morning sun, blocking my path to the waiting town car. He looked broken, utterly defeated. Mom, don't, he pleaded, his voice raw with a pain that was palpable. Please don't leave like this. Don't cut us off. This isn't about me leaving Ethan, I said, my hand firm on the handle of my single suitcase. It felt like the only solid thing in the world. This is about me finally acknowledging a truth that has existed for years. You and Jessica pushed me out of your lives a long time ago. I'm just stopping the pretense of knocking on a door you never intended to open. It was me, he choked out, tears finally breaking free and streaming down his face. He didn't bother to wipe them away. It was all me. I was a coward. I was weak and she knew it. And then, standing there in the same spot where my humiliation had occurred just 2 days before, he finally confessed everything. Not just the things I already knew, but the deeper, uglier truths he had hidden even from himself for years. The kids, Mason especially, he used to ask about you all the time when he was little, he said, his voice barely a whisper, forcing me to lean closer to hear. When is Grandma Ellie coming to visit? He'd ask. And Jessica, she would always have an excuse. You were busy, you were traveling, you were feeling unwell. She would lie right to his face. And I stood there. I knew she was lying. And I said nothing. My heart, which I thought had turned to stone, ached with a fresh, sharp pain. My grandson had asked for me, and they had denied him that simple, childish wish. Why, Ethan? I asked, the word catching in my throat. Why would you let her do that to your own son? To your own mother? He finally looked me in the eye, and what I saw there was a depth of self-loathing that was almost painful to witness. Because it was easier, he admitted, the words tearing from him raw and ragged. It was easier to believe her lies than to have the fight that would follow if I contradicted her. It was easier to keep you at a distance than to try and integrate you into our lives. Because having you there, it would have meant standing up to her. And I never did. Not once. He took a shaky breath, the confession spilling out of him now unstoppable. There's more, he said. Right after Dad's funeral, after we had that talk in your kitchen, Jessica sat me down. She told me that I was the man of the family now. She said that widows your age, they get needy, dependent, that I would have to manage you, to control the finances, or you become a burden on our new life together. The air left my lungs. A burden. That's what they had decided I was, before the grief had even settled. And I believed her, he whispered, shame coloring his face a dark, mottled red. I went into those meetings with you expecting to find a helpless, confused woman. But you weren't. You were sharp, organized, in complete control. You knew more about Dad's portfolio than I did. And that, it infuriated her. It proved her narrative wrong. And it shamed me. It shamed me that I had underestimated my own mother so profoundly. He wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. So I let her create the new story. The one where you were a difficult, demanding mother-in-law we had to keep at arm's length to protect our peace. I let her do it because it soothed my own guilt and my own inadequacy. I let her poison our family, and I stood by and handed her the cup. The whole ugly, twisted picture was finally complete. It wasn't just about money. It was about control, about insecurity, about a deep-seated weakness in my son that his wife had masterfully exploited for 15 long, lonely years. I looked at the weeping man before me, the man who was my child, and I felt a vast, empty sadness. Be a better father to your children, Ethan, I said softly, my voice devoid of anger. Be a better man than you were a son. I walked past him then, out into the crisp mountain air and toward the waiting car. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. 6 months passed. The crisp, thin mountain air of Colorado was a distant memory, replaced by the warm, salt-laced breeze of Charleston, South Carolina. I had bought a small, charming house, a cottage, the effusive realtor had called it, painted a cheerful shade of seafoam green, with a wide, welcoming front porch and a garden that spilled over with fragrant jasmine and vibrant hydrangeas. From my porch swing, I could see a sliver of the Atlantic Ocean, glittering under the Carolina sun. This was my sanctuary. This was my home. My old life felt like a story I'd read about someone else, a faintly tragic character in a novel. The sale of my shares in the Aspen Pines Lodge had been finalized swiftly and discreetly, just as I'd wanted. My lawyer, David, had handled everything with quiet efficiency. As per my instructions, he had established an ironclad, irrevocable trust fund for my grandchildren, Mason and Sophie. The terms were simple and absolute. They would gain access to their respective shares on their 25th birthdays, not a day before. Until then, the principal was untouchable, and I had made sure David included a clause specifying that neither Ethan nor Jessica had any legal access or control over the funds under any circumstances, not even as guardians. It was the only way I could ensure Robert's legacy, his hard work and brilliant foresight, would go to his grandchildren, not be squandered by their parents' greed or breathtaking folly. The remaining third of the proceeds, a considerable sum that still felt unreal to me, I donated. I split it between two charities. One that provides legal aid and emotional support to elderly individuals suffering from familial abuse and neglect, and another that funds arts programs in underprivileged schools. Felt right. It felt like turning 15 years of my own private pain into someone else's protection, someone else's joy. My days settled into a peaceful, comforting rhythm. I joined a local gardening club, where the main topics of conversation were the relentless humidity and the best way to deter slugs. I started volunteering at the local library twice a week, reading stories to wide-eyed children, their infectious laughter a balm to my soul. Most importantly, I made friends. Real friends. A group of women, widows, divorcees, some who had never married, who met for dinner every Thursday at a different local restaurant. We called ourselves the Thursday Club. We were all over 60, all with our own stories of love, loss, and resilience. We shared stories, uproarious laughter, and sometimes quiet tears. We had built our own little family, one based not on obligation or blood, but on mutual respect, shared experience, and genuine affection. Ethan's calls had been frantic at first, a barrage of voicemails filled with apologies, promises, and pleas. 17 missed calls in the first week after I left Aspen. I let them all go to voicemail. In the quiet of the evenings, I listened to each one, not to torture myself, but to solidify my resolve. They were just words, desperate and hollow. I needed actions, and the only action that mattered now was his absence. Eventually, the calls tapered off. One a week. Then one a month. Now for the past 2 months there had been only silence. And the silence was a blessing. It wasn't emptiness, it was peace. It was the beautiful, uninterrupted sound of my own life. I truly thought that chapter was well and truly closed. I was sitting on my porch swing one sunny afternoon, a tall glass of iced tea sweating in my hand, watching the hummingbirds dart among the bright pink hibiscus flowers. I felt a sense of contentment so profound it was almost startling. I was happy, truly deeply happy, in a way I hadn't realized was possible. The loneliness that had been my constant companion for so long had finally packed its bags and left. That was when the mail truck pulled up, its familiar rumble a part of my daily rhythm. The carrier, a friendly woman named Pat, placed a small stack of letters in my mailbox and a single, medium-sized cardboard box on my porch steps with a cheerful wave. I didn't think much of it. I'd ordered some new ergonomic gardening tools online. My back wasn't what it used to be. I finished my tea, enjoying the last of the afternoon sun, then went to retrieve my mail. I sorted through the bills and the usual junk mail, then bent down to pick up the box. It was heavier than I expected for a trowel and a weeder. I glanced down at the shipping label to see the company name, and then I saw the handwriting. There was no return address listed. Just a post office box in a town near Ethan's. But I didn't need one. My blood ran cold, a sudden icy shock in the warm Carolina air. I knew that familiar, slightly slanted script better than my own. I had seen it on 1,000 birthday cards and school permission slips. It was from Ethan. I stood there frozen on my sunny porch, the box feeling like a lead weight in my hands, pulling me back into a past I had fought so hard to escape. I had built a fortress of peace around myself, brick by brick, and he had just found a way to lob a package over the walls. I carried it inside and placed it on my kitchen table, staring at it as if it were a venomous snake. Every instinct screamed at me to throw it in the trash, unopened, to write return to sender on it, and leave it for Pat to pick up tomorrow. But I couldn't. A small, treacherous part of me had to know. With trembling hands, I reached for a pair of scissors from the kitchen drawer and slit the packing tape. The past wasn't done with me yet. The box was neatly packed. On top lay a thick, cream-colored envelope with my name, Mom, written on the front in Ethan's familiar, slightly slanted script. Beneath it, nestled in a bed of protective tissue paper, was a handsome dark brown, leather-bound journal, its corners softened and worn with age. My breath caught in my throat. My heart gave a painful lurch. I knew that journal. It was Robert's. The one he kept on his bedside table for over 40 years. My hand shook as I picked up the letter first. It felt heavier than paper ought to feel. I sat down at my small kitchen table, the scent of jasmine and salt air wafting in through the open window, a stark contrast to the sudden turmoil inside me. I slid my finger under the flap and unfolded the pages. The letter was several pages long. "Mom," it began. "I don't expect you to answer this. I don't even know if you'll read past this first line, but I have to write it anyway. I owe you that much and so much more. There are things you deserve to know. Jessica and I are getting a divorce. The papers were filed last week. It's amicable as much as these things can be. I want to be clear. This is not because of you, not directly. You were the catalyst, the event that finally pulled back the curtain, but the rot was there all along. Our marriage was built on a foundation of her manipulation and my cowardice. We can't live like that anymore. I can't live like that anymore. I'm in therapy now, trying to understand how I let it get to that point. The kids are confused. We're doing our best to make it easy for them. Sophie is young, but she senses the tension. Mason asks about you constantly. He talks about our visits. I've started telling them about you. Not the twisted, resentful version Jessica created, but the truth. I tell them how you took care of me when I was a boy, how you taught me to ride a bike, how much you sacrificed for Dad and for me. I tell them how strong you were when the world expected you to fall apart. And I've told them how I failed you, how I let them be kept from you. It's a hard conversation, but one I have to have. They need to know the truth of it. My vision blurred with tears. I stopped, took a deep, shaky breath, and wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. I had to keep reading. That brings me to what's in the box. When I was finally clearing out the attic, going through the boxes of Dad's things I should have dealt with years ago, I found his old journal. He wrote in it almost every day. I started reading it looking for, I don't know what. Answers, I guess. He wrote about his work, about the garden, but mostly, Mom, he wrote about you. About how much he admired you, how you were his favorite person in the world, his anchor. There's one entry in particular that he had bookmarked with an old photograph of the two of you. He wrote it the morning of the day he died. Just hours before his heart attack. I think you need to see it. It belongs to you. I read it, Mom, and I cried for 3 days straight. A grief deeper than what I felt at his funeral. Because Dad knew you. He saw you completely, with a clarity I was too weak and selfish to ever achieve. I was so busy trying to be the man of the family, so easily swayed by Jessica's constant, insidious poison, that I never stopped to see the incredible, resilient woman who was my own mother. I'm not sending this to get your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. My lawyer informed me about the trust fund you set up for the kids, and about your donation. It was an act of grace I will never comprehend. I don't deserve that either, but thank you from the bottom of my heart. I am sending this because you deserve to know that Dad loved you exactly as you were. And you deserve to know that I, finally, at long last, have learned to see what he saw all along. Be happy, Mom. Be everything you were never allowed to be when you were busy trying to be a part of our family. With love and eternal regret, Ethan. I set the letter down on the table, my whole body trembling. Silent tears streamed down my face as I lifted the heavy, worn journal from the box. The leather felt familiar under my fingertips. It fell open easily to the page marked with the faded photograph. The two of us on our honeymoon, young and ridiculously happy. Robert's handwriting, so clear and beloved it felt like a part of my own soul, filled the page. The date at the top was the last day of his life. I read his words, his private thoughts about me, about our life together, about his unwavering faith in my strength. And then I read the last lines, the lines Ethan had mentioned, the words that would change everything. If anything should happen to me, I know Eleanor will be all right. She is the strongest person I know, with a core of steel beneath that gentle heart. But I hope Ethan sees it too. I hope he takes care of her in the way she deserves to be taken care of, not in the way he thinks she needs. I hope he honors her. I closed the journal and held it tight against my chest, rocking slightly in my chair, looking out the window at the endless blue of the ocean. He had known me. He had seen me. After all the years of feeling invisible, of being misunderstood and undervalued by my own son, this felt like a validation from beyond the grave. Robert had seen me. And in that moment that had to be enough. I didn't reply to the letter. There was nothing to say. He had found his truth and I was finally at peace with mine. A year passed after the arrival of the letter. A year of quiet healing, of salty air and laughter-filled Thursday club dinners. I put Robert's journal on my bedside table. A tangible reminder of a love that was real and true. I had found my rhythm, my quiet joy. I was content in a way I hadn't thought possible. Then one Saturday afternoon, as I was pruning my rose bushes, my phone rang. It was a local number I didn't recognize. Usually I'd let it go to voicemail, but for some reason I answered. "Hello," I said cautiously. "Hi, is this Mrs. Vance?" A cheerful young voice asked. "This is Jennifer from the Harborview Cafe down on King Street. I'm so sorry to bother you, but there's a gentleman and a young boy here asking for you. The boy says, he says you're his grandma." My heart stopped. It didn't just lurch. It seized in my chest, a frantic, trapped bird. I dropped my pruning shears into the flower bed. 1,000 thoughts, 1,000 fears raced through my mind. How did they find me? My lawyer swore he hadn't given them my address. It had to be a private investigator. The thought made my stomach churn with a sick, invasive feeling. Had Ethan disregarded my silence and hunted me down? "Ma'am? Are you still there?" Jennifer's voice was laced with concern. "Yes," I managed to say, my voice tight and thin. "Yes, I'm here." Part of me, the part that had spent the last 2 years carefully building this peaceful, fortified life, screamed at me to say no. To hang up the phone, lock my doors, and pretend the call never happened. To protect myself. But another part, a smaller, quieter part that I had tried so hard to bury, felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. It was a dangerous, treacherous mix of curiosity and a deep buried ache for the grandchildren I barely knew. For the boy with my eyes. "Tell them," I said, my voice shaking slightly, the words coming out before I could stop them. "Tell them I will be there in 20 minutes. I hung up and stared at my reflection in the dark glass of the living room window. My hair was a mess from gardening, pinned up haphazardly, and there was a smudge of dirt on my cheek. I looked like a wild woman of the garden. I quickly went inside, washed my face, and changed into a clean linen shirt. I ran a brush through my hair, my hands unsteady. I took a deep, fortifying breath that did little to calm the frantic beating of my heart. The cafe was only a 10-minute walk from my house, but I took the long way along the waterfront promenade, needing the time to steel myself, to build my walls back up. I saw them through the large picture window before I even went inside. Ethan was sitting at a small table, looking thinner, more tired than I remembered. He looked older than his years, the weight of his choices etched on his face. And next to him sat Mason, my grandson, now 10 years old, with his father's dark, wavy hair, and as I got closer, I saw with a painful pang in my chest that he had my eyes. Robert's eyes. Mason saw me first through the glass. His face broke into a wide, hopeful smile, and he started to stand, then seemed to think better of it, glancing at his father before settling back into his chair. He looked uncertain, hopeful, and scared all at once. My heart ached for him. I pushed open the door, a small bell jingling cheerfully overhead, and walked toward their table. The entire cafe seemed to fade into the background. Ethan stood as I approached, his hands shoved nervously in his pockets. He looked like a man bracing for a storm, ready to accept any judgment I threw his way. "Hi, Mom," he said softly, his voice full of a quiet respect I'd never heard from him before. "Ethan." I nodded once, my tone neutral. Then I looked at my grandson, and my carefully constructed walls crumbled just a little. "Hello, Mason." "Hi, Grandma," he mumbled, his eyes fixed on the tabletop, a shy flush on his cheeks. We sat. The silence was awkward, heavy with 15 years of unspoken words and unhealed wounds. A waitress came and I ordered an iced tea. Ethan ordered a black coffee, and Mason got a hot chocolate piled high with a mountain of whipped cream. It was Mason who finally, bravely broke the silence. He looked up at me from under his long lashes, his expression serious. "Dad says. He says we didn't see you for a long time because he made a lot of mistakes." I glanced at Ethan. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, giving me permission to be honest. "Yes, honey," I said carefully. "That's true. And he says you didn't want to see us because he hurt you," Mason continued. his small voice full of a gravity no child should have to carry. That's also true, I said gently. He stirred his hot chocolate, his little brow furrowed in concentration. I'm sorry, he whispered, looking at me again, his eyes wide and sincere. I'm sorry I didn't get to know you better. A lump formed in my throat, thick and painful. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his small one. Oh, Mason, none of this was ever your fault. Not one single bit of it. You are a wonderful boy. Ethan finally spoke, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't come here to ask for anything, Mom. I swear on my life. I'm not asking for forgiveness or money or a second chance. I came because Mason deserves to know his grandmother. He deserves that piece of his family. And because... He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Because I wanted you to see that I'm trying to be better. Trying to teach him what I didn't learn until it was far, far too late. I looked at the pleading in his eyes, and the hope in my grandson's. I was standing at a crossroads. One path led back to my quiet, safe, solitary peace. The other led into an unknown future. One that involved opening my heart again. Risking the very real possibility of being hurt again. I was opening the door just a crack. I prayed to God it wouldn't be a mistake that would destroy everything I had built. I looked at Ethan, then my gaze settled on Mason, my grandson. He was an innocent in all of this, a child who had been denied a relationship because of his parents' spectacular failings. He didn't deserve to pay the price for their mistakes, a price he had already been paying for years without even knowing it. All right, I said, my voice firm, surprising even myself. The decision felt both terrifying and profoundly right. I turned my full attention to Mason, a real smile touching my lips for the first time. How would you like to come to my house sometime? I live right by the ocean. We could walk on the beach and look for shark teeth. I have a whole jar of them. His face broke into a radiant, gap-toothed smile. It was like watching the sun come out from behind a thick bank of clouds. Really? He breathed, his eyes shining. Can we, Dad? Can we? I then turned my gaze to Ethan, and my expression hardened. The smile vanished. This was the negotiation. This was where the new rules were written in stone. Once a month, I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. You will bring Mason here to this cafe. I will pick him up. You will come back here to get him 3 hours later. Exactly 3 hours. You do not come to my house. You do not call me. Unless it is a life or death emergency regarding the children. We do not have long heart-to-heart family chats. This is about me and my grandchildren. It is not about us. Are we absolutely clear on that? Tears welled in Ethan's eyes, but he nodded quickly, gratefully, as if I had just handed him the greatest gift in the world. Crystal clear, Mom. Whatever you say. Thank you. More than you know, thank you. Don't thank me, I said coolly, my voice like ice to counteract the warmth I felt for my grandson. I'm not doing this for you. I am doing this for him. And for me. And it was the truth. The visits began the following month. And to his credit, Ethan kept his word with a reverence that bordered on religious. He would be waiting at the cafe when I arrived, and he would be in the exact same booth when I brought Mason back exactly 3 hours later, never a minute late. He never pushed for more. He never tried to engage me in long conversations, just a polite hello and goodbye. He respected the boundaries I had set. It was the first truly respectful thing he had done in 15 years, and that small act spoke volumes more than his tearful apologies ever could. Slowly, tentatively, Mason and I began to build our own relationship. It was a delicate, precious thing, woven from shared discoveries on the beach as we hunted for the perfect sand dollar. The sweet, warm scent of chocolate chip cookies baking in my small kitchen, and quiet talks on my porch swing as we watched the container ships glide by on the horizon. He told me about school, about his friends, about his love for building complex Lego sets that took over the entire living room floor. He told me about the divorce, how he missed his mom sometimes, but how things at home with his dad were quieter now, calmer. He never spoke ill of Jessica, and I never asked. It wasn't my place. My place was simply to be his grandmother, a safe, stable, loving presence in his life. A few months in, during one of his drop-offs, Ethan hesitantly asked if Sophie, his younger daughter, could come along on the next visit. She was 7 now, and according to Ethan, she was asking why her big brother got to have adventures with Grandma Ellie, and she didn't. I agreed. Sophie was shyer than Mason, more cautious. She clung to her brother's hand for the first hour of her first visit. But soon she was helping me in the garden, her small hands patting the soil around my tomato plants with intense concentration, her delighted squeals echoing as we found ladybugs and earthworms. I told them stories about their grandpa Robert. I showed them his picture, which I kept on the mantelpiece. I told them how he could build anything from wood, how he loved to sail, how he had a laugh that could make the whole house shake. I was giving them back a piece of their history, a piece of their family that had been stolen from them. We weren't a traditional family, not by a long shot. We were a fragile, cobbled-together thing. But we were something. And for now, that something felt like enough. Felt like a start. One afternoon, about 6 months after our first meeting, Mason and I were sitting on the porch, eating grilled cheese sandwiches. He was quiet for a long time, watching the gulls circle over the water. Then he said, out of the blue, his voice serious, "Dad says you're the strongest person he knows." I paused, my sandwich halfway to my mouth. "Oh, does he?" "Yeah," Mason said, taking a big bite. He chewed thoughtfully, then continued. "He says you were strong even when nobody was watching. He says that's what real strength is. Not being loud, but being strong on the inside." I felt a familiar lump form in my throat. "Your dad is getting wiser in his old age," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "He says he wishes he had been wise a long time ago," Mason said, his eyes serious as they met mine. "He told me that losing you was the biggest mistake of his life. And he said the best thing he can do now is make sure I don't make the same kinds of mistakes. That I know how to value people while they're still here." I had to turn my head and look out at the ocean, blinking back sudden hot tears. The words, coming from the innocent mouth of my grandson, carried a weight, a sincerity, that no direct apology from Ethan ever could. He wasn't just saying the words anymore. He was living them. He was teaching them. He was breaking the cycle. And I realized then, with a startling clarity, that this fragile new beginning wasn't just for my grandchildren. It was for me too. It was a form of healing I never knew I needed. 2 years after I left Aspen, 2 years after I had reclaimed my life, I was in my garden on a crisp autumn afternoon. The air smelled of salt and drying leaves. I was on my knees, my hands deep in the cool soil, planting tulip bulbs for the coming spring, a promise of future beauty. I heard the crunch of gravel on the path behind me and looked up, expecting to see my friend Carol from the Thursday Club, who often dropped by unannounced. It was Ethan. He was alone. I stood up slowly, my knees cracking a little in protest. I pulled off my dirt-caked gardening gloves and laid them on the edge of the raised flower bed. My heart didn't pound. My stomach didn't churn. I just felt calm. The old panic, the old anger was gone, replaced by a quiet stillness. "It's not your weekend for the kids," I said. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. "I know," he said. He stopped several feet away, at the edge of the garden, respecting the invisible line of my property, of my life. He didn't try to come closer. He looked healthier, I thought. The tired, haunted look was gone from his eyes. There was a quiet strength in his posture that hadn't been there before. I needed to say something. In person. I waited, leaning against my garden fence, letting the silence stretch. I was no longer in a hurry to fill the empty spaces. "Jessica got remarried last month," he said, his voice even. "To a man she met in therapy. Ironic, huh?" He let out a short, humorless laugh. "I hope he's happy. I truly do. But I didn't come here to talk about her. I came here because I finally get it." He took a deep breath, the ocean breeze ruffling his hair. "I finally understand. After all this time, after all the therapy, after watching you with my kids, I get it. I don't need your forgiveness to move on. That's not my job, to try and earn it back. That's asking something of you, and I have no right to ask for anything. My job is to live in a way that makes sure Mason and Sophie never have to ask for forgiveness for the same things I did." I listened, saying nothing, just watching the man my son had become. "I came to say thank you," he continued, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. It wasn't regret anymore. It was something quieter, more profound. It was acceptance. Thank you for letting my kids know you. For giving them the gift of a grandmother, a gift that I threw away with both hands. And to tell you, his voice cracked slightly, to tell you that I finally understand what true strength is. It's not about putting up with things. It's not about keeping the peace at any cost. It's knowing when to walk away. It's setting boundaries even when it hurts like hell. It's choosing yourself when no one else will. You taught me that, Mom. Not with words but by doing it. The wind sighed through the seagrass that lined my property, a soft, whispering sound. I lost you a long time ago, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. In that kitchen right after Dad's funeral. I just didn't have the courage to admit it for 15 years. But I accept it now. You're not my mom in the way you used to be. You're Mason and Sophie's grandmother. And that is more than I deserve. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't plead or bargain. He just stated his truth, a hard-won piece etched on his face. He gave a small, sad smile, nodded once as if to himself and turned to leave. He was almost to the end of the gravel path when something in me, something small but persistent, spoke up. Ethan, I called out. He stopped, his back to me, but he didn't turn around. What you're teaching your children, I said, my voice carrying clearly on the autumn wind. About respect. About boundaries. About not taking people for granted. I paused, taking a breath, the words forming in my heart before they reached my lips. Your father. He would be very, very proud of that. I saw his shoulders tense, then shake slightly with a silent sob. He raised a hand in a brief, final wave without turning, and kept walking until he disappeared down the street. I stayed in my garden as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in glorious strokes of orange, pink, and purple. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vindication. I felt a quiet, profound sense of closure. The relationship with the sun I once had was gone forever, dead and buried in the lobby of that cold mountain resort. But perhaps, just perhaps, a new one, a different one built on the hard, solid ground of truth and mutual respect, was beginning to grow in its place. That night I didn't think about what was lost. I thought about what was found. I had lost a family built on obligation and lies, but I had gained a life built on peace and authenticity. I had gained real friendships. I had gained a real, honest, beautiful connection with my grandchildren. Most importantly, I had gained myself back. I had finally learned that walking away isn't an act of abandonment. It's an act of survival. It's an act of self-respect. It's the hardest and most important kind of love there is. The love that says with a clear, unwavering voice, I deserve more than this. Thank you so much for listening to my story all the way to the end. It wasn't easy to share, but I know so many of us have faced our own private battles within our families. My question for you is this. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your own peace? Please, share your experience in the comments below. Let's remind each other that we are not alone. And if my story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories. You never know whose life you might touch.